think today's consumer is actually displaying a somewhat transformed attitude and behavior about what it is they need and what it is they want. We've just emerged from an era in which, by and large, certainly in the industrialized world, people were buying things that they didn't need with money that they didn't have. And individuals got surfeited with stuff. And I think what we're seeing now is people want to shed, A, in part because they can't afford it, and B, in part because it clutters the clarity that they need in their life, want to shed a lot of the stuff and want to focus on things that really deliver value and self-fulfillment around experiences. Healthcare, education, entertainment, travel and leisure, lifestyle enhancements, the things that they believe really ultimately enhances the quality of their life. And I think that fundamentally shifts not just the attitudes of consumers, but has a knock-on effect, of course, because it ultimately shifts the locus of economic power, of productive power, of what our enterprises need to produce and how we then sell it to the consuming public. There is an opportunity for all knowledge-rich, industrialized countries to capitalize on this shift in consumer behavior, attitudes, and intentions. If you look at the success of Apple, even during the depths of the U.S. recession, Apple continued to perform very robustly in the marketplace because they had simple, compelling value propositions which appealed to consumers and what they were prepared to open their wallet for. And I think across a whole range of needs that address some of the more fundamental problems of society in terms of energy cost and availability, in terms of environmental degradation, in terms of natural resource availability of every kind, there are lots of opportunities for us to address this question of dematerialization. How do we use our minds? How do we use our best science? How do we employ our technology to overcome the constraints that will otherwise force us off of the trajectory to continued economic progress and growth? How do we find the way to break this relationship between inputs and outputs? If in fact we are, as Global Footprint Network suggests, consuming 1.5 planet Earths, that's not sustainable. So what do we need to do to find alternatives to allow us to continue to grow without the degradation of the environment nor the inputs of natural resources that we have become accustomed to in the past? Everyone acknowledges the importance of demographics, but we don't spend enough time drilling down to really understand how fundamentally transformed demographics will change operating conditions for all of us. So for example, the baby boom generation, my generation, is not retiring, in part because many of them can't afford to, and also because many of them are just healthier, living longer, more vibrant. They choose not to. What does that mean for consumption patterns going forward? What does it mean for housing needs? Are the baby boom generation non-retirees no longer likely to move out of their principal residence in business center cities to the southwest or the southeast? And what does that mean for that housing market? What does it mean for stock market assets if they don't draw down on their 401k as anticipated in most of the actuarial models and continue to invest because they're continuing to work longer? What does it mean also for Generation X and Generation Y that have been assuming that some of these positions would be opening up as baby boom generation middle to senior management were to retire, if they no longer retire? What does that mean when people start bumping up against the glass ceiling? What does it mean for social overhead expenditures? What does it mean for the future of the retirement system? If every worker in the baby boom generation extended their working career by 5 years, we'd add $10 trillion to wealth generation in the U.S. economy. So that's just one small example of how more dynamic demographic assessments need to help guide our thinking across a whole range of private and public sector issues. In addition, Lancet Health Journal from the UK recently said that 50% of all children born in this century will live past the age of 100. Now, let's assume that they're 50% wrong. The fact of the matter is that's an extraordinary statistic. If the revolution in biotechnology is not only going to extend life expectancy, but productive life expectancy substantially, what does that mean for all of our population growth projections, which right now are based upon historical projections, sort of straight line projections from the past? We may be entering a quantum leap enhancement to life expectancy. So just as last century advances in public health meant that we extended life expectancy from 50 to 75 years of age, maybe we're at another threshold where we're going to have another quantum leap from 75 to 100 years of age. And the implications for that are also extraordinary. One needs to have a very clear risk map of the things that are controllable as well as the things that are probably uncontrollable. And when you denominate risks, you look at the risk of the likelihood that the risk is going to manifest itself, and then the impact of the risk. And based upon whether or not the risk is high impact and high likelihood, then you best design a plan that addresses or attempts to address management of that risk or avoidance of that risk or changing the business calculus completely to get away from some vulnerability to that risk. And if you denominate risk and you see low probability, low impact, you don't worry about it. So what you try and do is demythologize the risks by having a pretty rigorous process of trying to understand what those risks are and which of those risks you can manage and what the cost of management is, to make a hard-headed determination about whether or not these are risks that you can afford to take on. Fundamentally, the only way we can get government, industry, and the citizenry, civil society, and the common man, labor, to work together with a new social compact to realize new benefits of globalization is when each of us understand very clearly that the current course that we're on is self-destructive. It's only when government understands that if they're not providing an enabling environment for business, government has no tax resources, no revenue to be able to deliver on the needs of its constituents. And when industry understands that if they're not responsible and delivering broadly on the needs of their stakeholders, that they will no longer have the ability to continue to operate because government will regulate them in a way that will frustrate that opportunity. And when the average individual, the average worker understands that unless he or she is prepared to take a fresh, hard look at both the policies that they need to support in government, as well as what they need to do to be more supportive of industry's ability to be successful, they'll understand that this is not sustainable. So each actor, each sector, public sector, private sector, labor, need to almost have this kind of cathartic moment when they say, as Herbert Stein, the former chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, used to say, things that can't go on forever, sooner or later won't. It's when we reach that moment, when each actor understands this is not sustainable, that we'll be able to, I think, make the hard-headed decisions that ultimately must shape the future. My great fortune in life is that I spend all of my time traveling around the world, meeting some of the most interesting and insightful people in the private sector, in the clients with whom we have the honor of serving, in the public sector with government leaders of all stripe and political background, and also individuals, thought leaders, some of the most intelligent and insightful people in the world. I have the opportunity to work this circuit and go from one great idea and insight to another, and then to help cross-pollinate all of those ideas by hopefully passing on some of the positive and trying to minimize the negative. So my opportunity with audiences that I interact with is to share those insights, which come both from our work as well as my personal travel across a broad trajectory that began really with my own personal journey, going back to my early career as a planner in the oil industry, and then moving on to working in government in the United States Senate for 5 years as a chief of staff to then Senator Joseph R. Biden, and then moving back into sort of civil society when I worked for the Stanford Research Institute for 10 years, helping shape and develop some of the insights and thinking that has been critical to the work I've done for the last 20 years with A.T. Kearney, when I've literally worked all around the world with public and private sector clients, helping to address some of these thorniest of issues that bedevil us all now.